We're gonna take a stroll in my mind map about the third house. This video is happening because I was called out by somebody who was like, you haven't finished the house series. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Obviously, we're gonna talk about what it means, what it entails, planets in the third house, especially important for people who have Saturn in the third house or maybe Neptune in the third house. People who struggle with a third house are going to want to watch this video. Also, if you have a bad Mercury or if you struggle with your communication in any sort of way, I am going to have a special section for remediation ideas that I've developed. Obviously, if you have any suggestions for this, always feel free to add more in the comments. So the first thing I need you to know is that the houses function on several layers or levels. And the easiest way I can describe this is that they function on a physical level, then they function on a psychological level, and then they also function on what I'm calling an environmental level. There's certainly an environmental tone to the houses. And what I mean by this is that certain environments fit more easily into certain houses. But what you overall need to know is that the houses and all of the symbols in astrology, basically anything in the world, in the universe, can be placed into one of these houses. So if we're talking physically, if we're talking about medical astrology, anything that has to do with the body, the third house rules the mouth, the teeth, the teeth. Yes, some people are going to say Saturn, Capricorn. All of the speech structures are going to belong to the third house because generally the third house covers communication, right? You probably already know that. I'm trying to show you the things that you might not know. So it also covers breathing, the lungs, the tongue, anything. Hands are also ruled by the third house. People who have planets in the third house, like their sun or maybe their Mars, tend to be more animated with their hands. It rules mobility, gestures, it rules the brain because it also rules the nervous system. And what I'm going to try to show you is that the houses, because of these layers, they are interconnected. The third house also rules expressions, so the way that you express yourself. Remember, it's everything that has to do with communication, learning, speech, intellect, cleverness, communication, gossip. You can read all these things, but I want to point to the different pictures that I chose to use because cleverness is my favorite part about the third house. I love people who have planets in the third house. That's either a wolf or a coyote. I don't know. They're both known for being clever, cunning, intelligent, witty. All of those things have to do with our ability to be mentally dexterous, right? So if we're thinking about the third house and all of these layers that I'm talking about, can you see how, like, physically, the way that you express yourself with your hands, the way that you speak, has to do with your ability to communicate, to learn. Gossip also belongs in the third house. Interestingly, bait also belongs in the third house. That was a thing that caught my attention. It baited me to think about it. I'm thinking clickbait. Something that engages your mind is going to belong in the third house. Also, this I think I put in the next section. So now let's look at what I mean by environmental. So the third house has to do with everything that is in your local environment, in your local surroundings. So in your immediate environment. And this is directly opposed to, for example, the ninth house, which has to do with things that aren't in your immediate environment, that you have to travel long distance for. So the third house rules automobiles. It rules short distance travel, buses, transportation. I've also noticed that people who have a lot of planets in the third house tend to be in transportation. I've met men and women that are in transportation who have third house planets. I find this super interesting. There is, and I also put this in environmental because there's a casual tone to, because, you know, it's environmental, but there's also a certain tone to the houses. And so the third house has this very casual chit chat sort of tone. It's not very deep. And my Venus is in Scorpio, so I used to take that to be like a bad thing, like, oh, you know, you should look for depth. However, I realized that if you interact with a lot of people, you should not get very deep with a lot of people because you're not going to have a chance to like vet them, first of all. But also, you just cannot carry that heavy of a load. And remember, we're building this idea of the third house as being this very mobile, agile, dexterous sort of place, right? And people who are heavily third houseian are going to have this quality about them that allows them to adapt and move and change, right? And all of this is very useful for being interactive, for being dynamic, for being casual. It also, interestingly, advertising also, I put it under environmental because if you think about when you're in an environment that has like a lot of signs, think of Times Square, or when you're driving down the highway and you see a lot of advertisements, that it's supposed to bait you, grab your attention. So all of that to me is very tied to the third house. So let me zoom in on these images a little bit because I thought they were like really good for the third house. So look at this image here. Like obviously there's buses, but if you can like envision with me, it reminded me sort of like a modern version of the French Quarter, of New Orleans. So imagine if there were people all around on the street, first of all, but also in these balconies. If all of these balconies were full of people who were talking and interacting and chitting and chatting, would it be helpful for these people to be adaptable, for them to be like intellectually dexterous? I would say so, because if you are communing in an environment that is like inhabited by other people, let's just say your music is too loud and somebody's like, hey bro, that music's too loud. So what are you going to do? If you are like a very fiery person, you might be like, so who cares, right? And then no one's going to like you. And then you're not going to be able to participate in that lighthearted sort of dynamic environment. And that's kind of why I put that picture there. Also because of the buses and the transportation. Also, a children's playground is very third house because the third house also rules childhood, early childhood, and the first kind of playmates that we have when we are first learning to speak, because we first learn if we're lucky and our parents talk to us, we develop language through them, but more readily we learn from our peers, right? So think about how dynamic and boisterous and busy a playground is. So that's why I put that one there. And then this one with the butterflies, I have an obsession with thinking that Geminis and third house people are kind of like butterflies, and not the transformative Scorpio element of it, but think about this image and how it seems like perhaps this could have been a quiet sort of day or environment, and then these butterflies just kind of like flutter through. Think about how that would grab your attention, right? And then obviously here, I also put, it's a market, and think about the point of view here, how these people are standing here and they're looking out at everything, because the third house is your local environments, your local surroundings. And look how there's people down there to the right of the screen, and they're looking out at the boats, they're looking at what's coming in. It also rules commerce, advertisement, sales, everything that has to do with simple, easy communication. And so people who have planets in these houses, in this house specifically, this is just gonna come easily to them. All of the houses function in layers. And so if you could think about one of these things, you could see how it's connected to the other ones. So for example, if I tell you that it rules the nervous system and the brain, you could easily see how the brain is connected to attention, right? Then I tell you hands and gestures. It's also connected to expressions. Communication obviously is connected to the mouth, also can have nonverbal communication. You can communicate a lot with your eyes. You can communicate a lot with your hands. Your local surroundings, obviously, this is going to have to do with your mobility. Mobility is somewhere in here. I saw it. Oh, it's over here. Mobility is connected to your ability to drive around town, get around town. All of these things are connected. And that's how you start building an understanding of all of the houses and symbols in astrology, because if something belongs together, it's kind of within that little system. So when I originally did this series, there was a thing that I really like to do, which is something that helps me envision the houses and the different symbols in astrology as personify things. So I like to imagine who would greet me. If the third house was a place, if it was like literally a house and I was gonna go knock on the door, who would open the door for me? So if you guess who's gonna open the door in the third house, please put it in the comments if you already guess who it's going to be, because I would immediately guess who was going to open the door of the third house for me. But if you didn't guess, obviously it's freaking 𝗁cie𝗃𝗃. Why? Let's talk about, first of all, do you need proof that this man is super third house? This man has 3 planets. So first of all, He's a rising Scorpio. His chart ruler is in the third house. So this off the bat is going to make him a super third house person. Wherever your chart ruler is, the ruler of your ascendant sign, you're going to have a lot of presence in that house, no matter where your sun is. But this man also happens to have his sun in there. So he has two very important planets in the third house. Not only that, he also has his moon in Gemini. And Gemini in the third house, they're like this. Maybe they're not twins, but they're very close cousins. Okay, maybe they're fraternal twins. So 𝗁𝗃𝗃 is going to open the door to the third house. And let's talk about what a third house person could look like. Obviously, 𝗁𝗃𝗃, his range of ability to play different characters is probably the most varied, right? I can't think of anybody else who's as dexterous when it comes to performing as 𝗁𝗃𝗃. And I put this different kinds of movies that he was in to, like, in case you don't know, right? I grew up with 𝗁𝗃𝗃 in the 90s, right? So he's able to make comedies. He's able to make dramas. He can make movies that are more geared towards kids. Like he made The Grinch, he made The Mask. 𝗁𝗃𝗃 would absolutely open the door for us if the third house was an actual house and we would go knock on the door. Okay, so now let's get briefly into the planets. So if you have your sun in the third house, obviously your sun is your sense of pride, where you shine, and you can tend to be a person who loves to it always is going to depend on the sign. If you have a Scorpio sun in the third house, I don't want you to tell me that you don't talk a lot. I already know that. Scorpio in the third house is the quietest, probably along with Capricorn in the third house, obviously, because that would also be a Scorpio rising. But Capricorn and Scorpio in the third house, and maybe Pisces and Neptune, are going to be a little bit more reserved. So always, you have to interpret everything in layers. But if your sun is in the third house, you take a lot of pride in your intellect, in your ability to figure things out, in your ability to be smart and mentally dexterous. If you have your moon there, that is your heart. That is where you find comfort. That is how you nurture other people, but also nurture yourself. You're going to communicate in a very kind sort of way, and you are sensitive to communication. So you're going to very easily perceive people who have a bit of a sharp tone, or if there's a shift in the tone of the communication, you're really going to notice it right away if you have your moon in the third house. If you have your Venus in the third house, this is one of my favorite placements. These people are natural salespeople. They're very good at advertising. They're very good at marketing, at networking. That's the word I was looking for earlier. So these are the people that are, and even if you don't realize this, obviously, as I keep saying, keep in mind the element, the signs that are in there. Earth and water tend to be a little bit more subdued, a little shyer. But if you have a fire Venus in there, if you have an air Venus in there, that's wonderful and amazing. And it's going to come naturally. Nonetheless, no matter what sign your Venus is in, if it's in the third house, you have a facility and easiness when it comes to communicating and making connections with people. And these don't necessarily have to be the deepest connections because, as I've learned, you don't have to connect very deeply with everyone. And you shouldn't connect very deeply with everyone because you would be completely exhausted if you did that. So this gets troublesome when it comes to relationships, but that's not what this video is about. If you would like a video about that, Mercury. This is a wonderful place to have Mercury because obviously Mercury is our planet of communication. And if you have it in the third house, this is going to be a great place for it. It's just kind of like primed and ready. Your attention, you have a lot of attention to give, and you're able to pick up on all sorts of details around you. Obviously, keep in mind that other planets that are in the third house are going to modify this energy or any aspects to that Mercury. Mars is the Mars that needs variety. It doesn't matter what sign it's in, even though if it's in fire or in air, it's going to need even more variety. And remember that Mars is our physical energy, the way that we expend it, the way that it feels good to us to kind of embody ourselves and live our lives. And when we have Mars in the third house, we like to be busy. We do not like to be sitting on our butt for an extended period of time. We need to keep moving. And we need to have different kinds of things to do. I've noticed that a lot of people who have Mars in the third house, they're the kind of people to have multiple jobs. Like I'll have a job here, I'll have a job there, I'll have a little side gig, a weekend gig. And they love it. It's not because they want a bunch of money. Some of them do. Who cares? But that's not why they do it. They do it because they like to stay busy. And to them, the worst thing is just to be at home and twiddle your thumbs. Even if they're at home, they would be doing something, but they prefer to be out and around town because remember that the third house rules your local surroundings. So what else was I going to say about this? Jupiter. If you have Jupiter in the third house, you spend your mind on a lot of spiritual matters. You see meaning everywhere, or you try to at the very least. And if you have a water Jupiter, those tend to get lost kind of in spirituality in a good way and in a bad way. If you have Saturn in there, special note for Saturn. If you have Saturn in the third house, I commend you. It has pros and cons. Let's start with the cons. The cons is the greatest con is that Saturn is this stiff grandpa that to me feels like a stick in the mud. But in this case, it's like a stick in your throat. It's just like stuck there. It's dry and it just does not feel good. You can have literally like the sensation of dryness in your mouth or like tension in your throat. And this is because there's a restraining sort of physical sensation that can happen when you have Saturn there. If you've always had Saturn there, obviously, if that's your natal placement, you're like, Denise, I don't feel that. Look, what you might feel is that you can't speak up even though you'd like to, because Saturn is this very judgy sort of energy. And it's going to have you questioning, should you really say that? What are people going to think? Are you smart enough? What do you know? What do you have to add to the conversation? It's this very judgy guy on your shoulder anytime you're going to want to open your mouth. And you're really going to feel limited and restrained. And that's the con. And it's a big one. But the pro of having Saturn in the third house is that Saturn is this beautiful old man that just wants one thing from you. And it is attention, work, and effort. Wherever you have your Saturn, wherever you have Capricorn energy, you're going to need to put a lot of attention, focus, and effort and work. And so if you put attention and effort and work into your communication, if you start building what I'm calling here in the end of the video, like a metacognitive practice where you are thinking about your thinking and your speech, then you could really become very good at speaking, because obviously wherever you put effort could end up being a place where you end up shining. So Saturn, it takes time. I'm talking time. Like this is after your 30s, after your Saturn return, you're going to have a very elegant way of communicating, a very mature way of communicating, and your thoughts and your ideas are really gonna like be very powerful, but not if you don't put effort and time and just like dedicated attention to this. It's not easy. If you have Uranus in the third house, you can have an unusual way of communicating. Uranus is also associated with the nervous system. You could be a little twitchy. When you have Uranus in the third house, you're going to have a sort of electric way of saying things. And it could be a little bit alienating because remember that the third house is your local environment. So you might feel like an oddball. But what I've learned about Uranus after all these years is that Uranus likes to be an oddball. So like that feeling of alienation you could feel with Uranus in the third house, it's a little bit self-inflicted, but also it's not terrible. Like maybe you are alienated, maybe you're different, and it's okay to be different. If you have Neptune in the third house, it's a little bit similar to the Saturn, as I said, because it could be inhibiting, but it's inhibiting in a different way. So Neptune makes you confused and foggy. So it could literally feel like mental fog when you have Neptune in the third house. If this is your natal placement, you want to bring awareness. With Neptune, whenever you're talking about Neptune and Neptune issues, the best thing that we could do is provide the opposite energy, which would be like Mercury or Saturn. So bringing focused attention and being very like logical and raw when it comes to your communication. You have to make sure that you're detailed in the things that you say, that you're saying what you intend to say. Maybe you have to spend some time and like think about what you want to say before you actually say it. Maybe instead of speaking something, you have to write it down, send it as an email, letter, or a text, because what you want to do is clarify things, because Neptune makes things very foggy. If you have Pluto, also another thing that feels very inhibiting in the third house, but Pluto is not because they're confused. Pluto is because they're watching and observing what's going on in their environment and their surroundings. And they're very careful with the things that they say because they are aware that information has power. And so they want to stay very on top of that. So now let us go into, so I'm calling this building mindfulness around communication and our immediate environment. And I said here that this is especially useful if you have your Saturn there or if you have Capricorn in the third house, so if you're rising Scorpio. But obviously, if you are going through a transit of Saturn in the third house, or if you just have a shitty Mercury or you feel like your Mercury could use some help, these are some ideas that I thought of. So I said micro journaling for a reason. And the reason why it's micro journaling is because this is building a journaling practice that you can actually do every single day. Like maybe you don't have 30 minutes, the luxury of 30 minutes every single day to sit and write. If you do, great. You should use it if you're trying to work on your third house. But if you don't have 30 minutes, can you sit for 5 minutes at the end of the day and think about your speech, your thought patterns? And so I gave you some ideas on how you can go about micro journaling. If you want a video on micro journaling, I would love to make that video. These are some ideas that you could use for it or take and run with these, right? So how does the sign of my third house negatively impact my speech? Every sign has its negative and its positive side. And so the process of like building this metacognition is going to require I'm using the word metacognition. It's annoying me. The way that you communicate is helping you in certain avenues and it's hindering you in others. And if you think that you struggle with this, then looking at the sign of your third house and also the sign of your Mercury, if you really want to be thorough, you're going to want to look at both and think about the positive and the negative and journal about that. That is one of the things that I have my people that have gone through my astrology coaching thing with me. That is one thing that we do in order to see how our communication is going to best work together, right? Some people, they want direct communication. Other people don't. It just depends. Where's your Mercury and what sign and what planets are in your third house? But this is the one that you could do every single day. So that's why I underlined it. How do today's interactions reflect the sign on my third house cusp? This could be a daily practice. You could do this in your notes. You could use one of the apps that I would highly suggest. Dailyo is a wonderful one. Absolutely love Dailyo. You can ask yourself that every single day. And through doing that, if you did it for like a week or if you did it for 30 days, you would start to notice patterns that there are misunderstandings, there are hurt feelings, there are maybe people felt that you were unclear, or maybe you felt that people were a little bit terse with you. So once you start building this practice, you're going to start to see how that sign is affecting your communication. The next thing you could do, obviously the third house also deals with your local environment. So you could sign up for a class, you could go to a yoga class, you can go to a pottery class, you can go to an archery class, whatever kind of classes are available in your daily environment. That is another great way of connecting with your third house. If you have Saturn in the third house, I highly, highly recommend that you do this because it's hard for you to get out there. And if you push yourself, remember that's what Saturn wants you to do. Saturn wants you to challenge yourself. He puts that burden on you and he puts this weight on you because he wants you to grow and get like muscular, right? It's like a weight. It's like lifting a weight and you have to lift it. You can't just leave it there. That sensation of heaviness can't just stay there. You need to do something with it. Obviously, Meetup is a wonderful website to find activities in your local area with that general theme of going around in your local area. And lastly, learn to network. This, especially if you have Saturn in the third house and you do any sort of, everybody should know how to network, man. That's how you find jobs. No matter what you do for a living, you need to make a list of places, maybe even through Meetup, or through LinkedIn, you make a list of places that you think you would meet people and make a list of these places and you're actually going to go and make a plan for when you're going to go. But also, this is another thing that comes very easily to people who have planets. The Venus in the third house people, So jealous of them. They just know how to introduce themselves, even just the smile. Because I don't know how to introduce myself. But the thing that I realized is that this is something that you could train yourself to do. It's just a skill, right? So if you practice and you put effort into this practice, then you can do that. It's all connected to the third house. And lastly, start thinking about how other people's third house might affect the way that they receive information and the way that they prefer to communicate. So in the previous one, I said that you should start thinking of fun questions that you could ask, because this is something that I'm kind of observant of this trait. I find it kind of annoying when people just, hi, my name is Denise. What do you do? I don't know. It's just like, why are you asking for my resume? I don't know you. I don't have a LinkedIn for a reason. It's none of your business. I don't know if I trust you yet. I'm not going to tell you what I do for a living. That's how I feel. But you, if you're putting yourself out there, you might want to tell people what your resume is. You have to think about these kinds of things. Some people find this totally normal. Some people find it invasive. Tell me if you think I'm crazy in the comments. I do realize that this is absolutely normal. Like, all my people who have planets in the third house, they all do this and it's normal to them. But this is just giving you an example, if you're a third house person, that this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. Not everyone is going to find that normal. So guys, I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, obviously subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn astrology for free, if you want to pay $10 for my ebook, obviously it's on Amazon. If you have any video requests, please leave them in the comments. And I know I've been talking about this free course that I'm making. These videos that I've been putting out have been like my practice runs. Like I'm trying to get like lohsy-goosey, so that once I start making the classes, like for the astrology course, they're as good as they could possibly be. This is me getting the kinks out on you guys before I actually put out the lessons. But I will see you very soon. I love you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.